Hi, this is Adam Eliel Berkowitz from Israel365 News, coming at you from the Golan. I'm here today with a guest. Usually I say a very dear friend, but this time he is a really, really dear friend. Bob Odell, he's the co-founder of RootSource. He was the initial investor in the organization. Bob's a high-tech entrepreneur and a philanthropist, a pro-Israel Christian. He has a lot of experience in different streams of the Christian faith, and he's worked with Jews in Israel continuously since 1988. He founded Wintegra, which was a successful high-tech Israel startup. He was working with an Israeli. And since 2013, Bob has focused on working with Orthodox Jews. And he's written about that experience. I believe it was a positive experience for him. I know it was a positive experience for me. His book is called 5 Years with Orthodox Jews, How Connecting with God's People Unlocks Understanding of God's Word. So, Bob, I think this book is something that is so necessary, and people don't know how much it's necessary, because you're a devout Christian from Texas. You connected with me. I was a Jew born and raised on the East Coast of the U.S., lived in Israel for almost 30 years. There is no common ground between us except for one thing, which is God in the Bible. And that seemed
and that flag above his head.
And the flag above your head, which is...
But that came later.
And I have to say that, Bob, I think the first time I realized that you're someone that I really had to connect to, we were at, I think it was at a conference, and you were driving me to someone's house to stay overnight.
Oh.
And I was literally with one foot out of your car. And you turned to me and you said, as a Jew, who is Rashi for you? And I don't know if all the viewers know who Rashi is, but he's, anytime a Jew learns Torah, that's the first source you go to. And you asked me that question, and you asked it in a way that made me realize you weren't asking who he was. You were asking who he was for me as a Jew. And it really, really touched me. And then the second time that you really touched my heart was you came to Israel, and you have an apartment in Israel because you're here a lot and you have that kind of connection. And you came all the way up to the Golan just to spend a day with me. And to be honest, at first I was a bit confused, because I'm like, why would we spend so much significant time together? I think I even took a day off from work to be with you. And it was such an amazing day that, unfortunately, even though I try to serve Hashem, I don't get time off to really connect with someone else on a deep spiritual level. And we did that for a full day. And it was so incredibly special. And it wasn't religious. It was all about Israel and who I am before Hashem and who you are before Hashem. And in those ways, you showed me that you were very sincere about this. So when you came out with the book, I'm thinking to myself, well, I hope he doesn't write about me in the book, even though I might be one of the Orthodox Jews he connected with. But you wrote a book that if Christians want to connect with Israel for spiritual reasons, they're going to have to cope with Orthodox Jews on some level.
Yeah.
And that's not as easy as they might think. It can be very, very prickly, very high impact, and we're both on unfamiliar territory. So
I have to admit that I didn't read the book, but this is the first time seeing it. But I am familiar with another book called Strangers, Neighbors and Strangers, Strangers and Neighbors. Do you know that book?
I don't think I do.
Okay, so it's written by a Scottish professor who grew up and studied theology in Scotland all of her life. And then she got a job teaching in the University of Scranton. And she just looked for a place to live that was close to the university. And she moved in not knowing that it was in the middle of an Orthodox Jewish community. And she moves in, and for the first time, she says, in her life, she realized that all the laws that she's been studying all her life are actually being practiced by people in real life today, in today's day and age, which she never realized that beforehand. And it's an incredible book. I'll get to you afterwards. I'll let you know exactly the details for it.
So yeah, so Bob, you wrote this book. You wrote this book about basically about how you connected with me, how you connected with Rivka Adler, how you connected with most of my friends, and the connection was not a simple connection. It was a very deep and meaningful connection. I think for us certainly, and I hope for you.
Right, right.
And it's not an easy thing. So it's not so simple to connect. Connect with Jews. So first of all, I want to know why. What did connecting with Orthodox Jews give to you as a devout Christian?
So a couple of things. First, you'll notice the color from the book is a little bit similar to that flag up there. This experience with Orthodox Jews for me was about Orthodox Jews in Israel. And as you mentioned, you did find your way into this book in several places, and so did over 24 other Orthodox Jews.
Right.
Let me say what this book isn't. I'd spent 25 years interacting with the Jews of Israel, but it was mainly in the context of high tech. And so we were, working on, large programs and, electronic design related projects and so forth. But as you mentioned, in 2013, God started to turn my heart towards coming to Israel again. I've been there many, many times, over 30 times before I even started to pursue a relationship with Orthodox Jews. But in 2014, I started that more purposely. I don't live in Israel, but I came to Israel enough and began to interact with people. And wow. By the way, you know why I asked to spend a day with you? It's because you work so hard. You're doing so much with Israel365 News that it was hard to ever get any time. Like,
That is,
have a meeting. You probably canceled a couple of meetings with me. I said,
I took a day off.
Yeah, I will come to your, and you said, hey, I'll take a day off and we'll spend the day together. And that was so fun. We went to Gamla. We drove around. We had lunch in your town. It was it was so fun. And we talked.
It was 1,000% spiritual. We were talking about things that were important to me as by chance a Jew struggling to serve Hashem, and things that were important to you as Bob Odell struggling to connect to Hashem.
So let me put forward the premise of the book. When I started to interact with Orthodox Jews in Israel, starting in 2014 through the end of 2018 and beyond, but it's really that 5-year period that I'm capturing. I began to see things in the Bible in a different way. Now, I've been in the church. I've been, a Christian for, over 50 years. I've read widely. I've been in many different streams of the Christian faith. But when I came to Israel and started interacting with people like you, all of a sudden, not only was I learning what you had to say, which was interesting in its own right, when you answered the question about how you see Rashi, for instance. And I remember that. I remember dropping in, I had a rental car. You needed to get somewhere. And so I was just dropping you off. And it started a thought about, okay, how do Orthodox Jews see the various grades? Of course, Maimonides and Rashi, but what about some of the others? And it was a really interesting conversation. That was the start of that conversation. But not only was I learning what people were telling me and the Jewish insights on the Tanakh, on the Hebrew Bible, or as Christians would call, the Old Testament, but those insights were great. But I was also getting something else. It was almost like I felt like God, Hashem, God was looking down on this connection and saying, you know what? I'd like it. I'd like it when you are interacting with the Orthodox Jews of Israel without agenda, just to learn, to interact, to share life together. And if you do that, I'm going to open up more of my word to you, and you're going to start to understand things that you've been struggling with maybe over a long period of time. And I'm going to open up God's word to you. And here's the most important part, and this is the reason for the book. It's not unique to me.
I was just going to say, what everything you said about me, I could say about you. I think this is, we've used, I think Rick Adler used the word cooperation. It's a bilateral symbiotic relationship.
Yes, but that wasn't even my point. My point is that you're adding another layer to it. I was just saying it happens to every Christian who is willing to interact, to have relationship with Orthodox Jews of Israel. I started talking to my friends that it was happening to them over and over. It was happening to everybody. And then I saw, you know what? Maybe God is just blessing this thing. And so that's what the book is about. It's like, okay, come see, take a journey with me, walk where I walk. Let me share with you the stories and the things that have happened along the way, what God has shown me, because this is what I think he wants. I think he's blessing this connection between us. And the fact that you gain something out of it, that's gravy, as we say in Texas.
Absolutely, everything you just said, I can apply to the Jews who connect with you, connect with the other Christians. Yeah. It's really, and it's totally not only unanticipated, but it's also unprecedented, and it runs counter-logical to all of history. It's really...
if I can ask you a question, Bob, you asked Elio what Rashi means to him. I'd like to know what Orthodox Jewry means to you. What is an Orthodox Jew to you, and how do you define that, and what does it mean?
Josh always does the high impact questions.
What a great question.
Because I can't define it, so I'm wondering if you can.
The giving of one of the chapters in this book talks about an insight that came to me in the process in this walk. One of the insights was that the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai to a group of people, which is what defines Orthodox Jews. It is the Torah. It is what God gave, and the group of people have worked together to try to come to an agreement and understanding of what that's going to look like as they live their lives. That event was like a startup. It was like a massive startup company. Like that was my world, high-tech startups, because you're setting a vision. When you start a company, you have a vision, you have an idea of what you want to create, how you want the world to change as a result of whatever product or service. God here is the entrepreneur, and he's saying, let me give you my thoughts, my idea of what a society could look like that could withstand the pressures of living in the world over 5,000 years and continue. So Orthodox Judaism is the result and the continuation of that original idea that God had put on the earth. Now, he didn't say that every other people group on the earth has to, be this way, but let's put together a model that we can look to and learn from, and appreciate at the very least. And if some of these things sort of rub off on us, and then so much the better. And certainly the moral law. So anyway, that's how I see it. And I'm so impressed that up until 200 years ago, there was essentially one branch of Judaism. It was the the Orthodox Judaism that we see today really is the continuation of what God gave to Moses, and Moses gave to the 70, and the 70 gave to the on and on. And so I think that is really, really beautiful. Yes, there are a few different variations. Reform Judaism today, conservative, they're interesting. But I'm especially interested in that root, in that continuation, that thing that goes back to what God's original heart was in His national startup, if you will.
So I'm wondering, Bob. I'm assuming. Was your book written for Jews or Christians or
what a great
both?
question. What a great question. It is a Christian writing to Christians with the idea that Jews might want to look over the shoulder and kind of see what this Christian is saying to the other Christians about them. And that is why the book was written with Gidon Ariel. We needed one real person to in his story to be unfolded in the book as well. Because, like, when I mention you in the book, Eliyahu, I can't really build out your full story, right? It's hard. I can't do that over 24 times. So let's take one example of one man, Gidon, and he was the first man to befriend me and introduce me to other Orthodox Jews. And so when I talk to my Christian friends in a particular chapter, when it's done, he gives his commentary on that.
Oh.
And so if the question, for instance, is about let's say Jewish community, if that's maybe the topic of that particular chapter of community life, then I'll ask him specific questions. Okay, what does your community life look like? Where do you live? How many people go to your synagogue? What is it like in that community? And so on and so forth. And so it sort of unfolds. So not only do you get me talking to Christians, but you sort of get this other layer of what Jewish life looks like on top of that. And it really helps. Gidon, as you know, is not he's a complicated person. And so there's a lot to him, even though he considers I'm a traditional Jew, but still there is a lot there, and he has his own unique spins on things, and that comes out in the book. So I think one of the things that the book does is it humanizes, and I think Tuli Weiss, when he reviewed the book, he said, read this book to learn the heart of a Jew. So that was one of the best lines that he had in his endorsement for the book.
Bob, you had an experience. You were fortunate enough to come to Israel to speak to Orthodox Jews. Most Christians have not been to Israel. They have not ever met an Orthodox Jew. What do most Christians? Let me start from what do most Christians think when they hear Orthodoxy? To me, when I think as an Orthodox Jew, thinking what a Christian might think, they may confuse that with Christian Orthodoxy, which is a completely different,
religion.
Completely different than what we're talking about. So is there a confusion about what Orthodox Jews, what it is and what it means?
I think there's tremendous confusion, and even the word, the word is sort of puts you down a mental path of not straying from, right? That's kind of what that word, makes you think from. And yet you get to Israel, and you don't actually have to come to Israel to get this. You just have to interact with people. When you start interacting, you learn, like early on, that the joke, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. You start to realize, there's diversity here. There's a lot of different ways people are understanding the scriptures. So orthodoxy is not as in some senses it is. Everyone has chosen to work together, that they're going to walk down the same path in terms of basic observance and how we're going to pray and when and how, and how many times in a day and things like that, and on holidays a bit more, and there is that, but there's also a big diversity. It just blows away the stereotypes. I had one stereotype after another blown away over the course of this 5 years, and that's really a lot of what this book is too. It's blowing those stereotypes. I had already interacted with some Orthodox Jews in my high-tech world, and so I wasn't completely, it wasn't like I was meeting Orthodox Jews for the first time, But once I started to go deep and like, let's talk about the Bible. Let's talk about the book that we share, our roots, our root source of our faith. Then all of a sudden, it began to be an explosion of the breaking down of stereotypes. One of the chapters, I think, in the first half of the book, is called "Scribes, Pharisees, and the Elephant in the Room." And it deals with this aha moment that I had once I began to know Orthodox Jews. I began to see, oh wait, we are carrying a preconceived notion with us in all of our interactions, and it comes from the way in which scribes and Pharisees are portrayed in the New Testament. So we're carrying with that, and that it enters every conversation we have. So so I deal with that. What does that mean, and how should we think about that? What should we do about that? You know, in the process.
That's always a confusing point to me. I'm sorry, Elio. That's always a confusing point for me as an Orthodox Jew here in Israel. That for me, it's natural to think of the historic figure of Jesus as being a Orthodox Jew living in the times of the temple.
Right.
For most Christians, they don't see it that way. I mean, even the pictures that you see don't look like your typical Orthodox Jew. They obviously have a very different idea of who this figure was than Orthodox Jewry would.
I think it's interesting if Josh already opened up the explosive subject for us of Jesus. I think Christians and Jews have a lot of common interests, a lot of common goals. For example, I write articles. I've become more and more anti-abortion, finding ourselves on the same side of a very polarized political arena. And interestingly enough, even when it comes to Jesus, I'm a bit of an advocate for Christians because part of the battle is people saying, "Oh, Jesus was a Palestinian man of color," and I can imagine how my friend Bob Odell would feel when he hears that.
There's no question that he would feel more comfortable going into an Orthodox synagogue than he would be going into a modern day church. So that's to me that's.
Oh, I don't know, but he would certainly feel. I mean, if Jesus was alive today and he was walking past Bethlehem, they wouldn't let him in, because he's a Jew.
Yeah. There's been so much written about. But by the way, I agree with you. Jesus kept the Torah, the written and the oral Torah.
He was in the temple.
He advocated faith. In fact, Dr. Brad Young was a guest on a launch event that we had recently, and he said, I think what Christians need to work on is they need to start studying the faith of Jesus rather than just having faith in Jesus. So that what the Orthodox Judaism was, it was the faith of Jesus, is the faith. So but see, so there's what I was going to say was there's lots of writing about the differences, right? And the book does touch on that in some places, but it's not the focus. The focus is what God does to bring his favor on those who are interacting with Orthodox Jews, to see how that can unlock understanding of the Bible for them. And that's, I think, something that's really not talked about. We think about the Christians and Jews, and the general thing is, well, okay, what divides us? No, how about how God feels about this interaction, and is he blessing it? That is, I think, the most interesting thing.
And the same thing I would say about the Bible. You mentioned the Bible. Clearly, Jesus would have been more comfortable reading the Hebrew Bible in its original form that we read today, as opposed to the King James version or any other version that's out there that has been translated from other.
No question. No
language.
question. He spoke Hebrew. He spoke Hebrew to his disciples. There's a little book by Doug Hamp that absolutely demonstrates that regarding Jesus. There, he spoke Hebrew. There's the Hebraic, the beauty of the Hebraics of God's word and Hebraic life is all over the New Testament. It is not something that we must step away from as Christians.
He probably
also-
spoke Aramaic in the streets, and that's the language
Of course.
the Talmud is written in today that we still study to this day.
Well,
I also
just a second. I love that point because you know what? This isn't in the book, but you know what? It's like, okay, today, what do Israelis speak? Hebrew, English, and Arabic, right? So you've got Hebrew, you know, in the Second Temple period, and your Aramaic is the Arabic side. It's towards the east, and English is, you know, towards the European side, towards the west. In that day, it was Greek. You know, so it's the same thing. Israelis are talented people. They can speak multiple languages. Yes, he spoke Aramaic. Yes, he spoke Hebrew. And I think he's probably spoke Greek too.
Okay, I'm going to throw it out on the table here, Bob. And the slightly maybe uncomfortable truth. One of the uncomfortable points as an Orthodox Jew connecting with Christians,
Yes,
which I see is very much the final stage of redemption, house of prayer for all nations, be a light unto the nations. One of the more uncomfortable points is I finally understood that proselytizing, preaching the gospel, is mandated. It's hardwired in Christianity, and it's actually an act of love. So it took me a long time. Very dear Christian friends I connect with, and then they'll start to proselytize with me, which is incredibly uncomfortable. It's something you have absolutely never even come close to doing. And I have to understand it's an act of love. And it's, I think, the big red sign that stops most Orthodox Jews from connecting with Christians. And there's a problem with that. Not with the proselytizing. The problem is that it's so unwanted. I compare it to offering candy to a diabetic. You know, it's an act of love, but you might kill him. But what I did learn from you, even though you have, like I said, to say that you never came close to proselytizing is an understatement. And of course, in Judaism, I'm forbidden from proselytizing. So I can't.
I read a tweet this morning. I forgot even where I saw it, that said that no human being has ever been killed for not converting to Judaism.
Okay, but my point is, as a result, unfortunately, as a Jew, I have a lot of Christian friends, and the ones who are very enthusiastic and about connecting with Jews, they're very careful not to teach me anything about Christianity. And I have on my desk a New Testament. I've tried to read many times, just haven't succeeded. But one thing that you, Bob Odell, turned me on to, which is fascinating, is the history of Christianity.
Yeah.
And especially the history of early Christianity, where I saw that the Christianity started out as a branch of Judaism, not just Jesus, but the early Christians. They saw themselves as Jews, and they were challenged by connecting to Gentiles.
I'm going to get into real big trouble now. So did Reform Jewry start off as Orthodox Jewry.
Exactly. And Hasidic Judaism was at one point thought of as outside of Judaism at all. It was like not by some people, it was considered not part of Judaism. And my understanding, as you've explained it to me, is early Christianity, it was very much a part of Judaism. And I felt it gave us a very comfortable space to connect in.
Yeah. I talk in one of the chapters of the book. I talk about Cornelius, the first.
Right, you taught me about it.
The first non-Jewish Christian, if you will. There's a chapter about it because I think, we have in the Bible, we have this thing called the first principle. The first time something happens, you learn from that. So what did Cornelius do? Did you know he interacted regularly with Orthodox Jews? That's how God favored him in the first place. He says your alms and your prayers have gone up as a memorial to God. So and that's how he got chosen, to have this experience. So there is that. I think about the history. One of the things early in the book, we do talk about some of that history. It's not the whole focus of the book, but there's an expression: nobody gets to choose the environment that they're born into. Only God chooses that. We don't get to choose. And I was born well over 1900 years after those first Jewish disciples of Yeshua, walked the earth. Over 1900 years, and a lot has changed since then. There's been a lot of history, and this is one of the best things I think for my Christian friends when you get ready to interact with Orthodox Jews, which I recommend, but you need to know your history. You need to know a little bit about your history so you understand how the Jewish people are hurting still from the history and the way that Christ was forced on people, and the way Christians who had political power took advantage of the Jews in their towns and in their countries. It's awful. But knowing that helps for me. It was a great work in preparing me to come to Israel, and really Eliyahu, what God had to do for me is he had to break down some of my pride. When I learned the history, it changed me, and I was able to obey much better Paul's command to us in Romans when he says, "Don't be arrogant against the root. Don't be arrogant against your Jewish brethren." And really, I think this is the heart of much of the problem in the last 2,000 years that we've had has come from arrogance on our side, not on the Jewish side, but on the Christian side. We've felt that we have Jesus in our hearts, and they do not. So we are at a higher level than them, and so they need to listen to us. And this is not God's heart. It's not God's heart to step yourself above somebody else. And I think God cringed over this. And so I think that the act of interacting and listening and learning is a thing. It equals the playing field, or even maybe Christians need to be sitting at the feet a little bit and seeing what they can learn rather than trying to talk about what they can teach. So this is a really, really fundamental thing. I've learned it, and I've had some of the best conversations with you about all kinds of things. Even Jesus, we can talk about when the agenda has been diffused.
Absolutely.
Someone once told me that to try to explain to a Christian what it feels like when they're proselytizing a Jew, that you should tell them that it's sort of like when a Mormon would come to you and try to proselytize you and tell you to accept the Book of Mormon. Maybe that would give a better idea of the vast differences in theology that we're talking about.
Yeah. So I want to just to add that for when I first started working for, back then it was Breaking Israel News, now it's Israel365 News. Rivka Adler and we used to get so much grief, and Tuli as well, grief over you're connecting with Christians and from the Jews, from Orthodox Jews. And what it boils down to, the conversations with the people who, the Orthodox Jews who object to this, always comes down to one point. Do you feel that there can be a meaningful spiritual relationship connection between Jews and Christians without one side trying to convert the other? If you feel that that's possible, and I'm just like, I've said many, many times when I get interviewed on Christian media, I kind of feel like I'm unconvertible. Even if I wanted to fake it, I couldn't fake it. So we get grief, and that's the dividing factor. And I feel just as I feel, maybe I should write like the Jewish version of your book. I hope people, I think actually Rivka does it much better.
5 years bearing up under angry Christians. Would that be the
She actually, her last book, and we discussed it with her last week, last week, about how it's actually, she sees it as a mandate for Torah Judaism to spread the light of Torah to the world, which is what she says is our original mandate. Now I have to ask you this question. It's very important. So outside of the obvious things like, don't invite your Jewish, Orthodox Jewish friend for cheeseburgers. Don't ask him to come over and to your barbecue and put a huge pig on the fire. Don't Shabbat, the Sabbath is a tricky one because it's crazy. Shabbat is admittedly insanely involved laws that you just wouldn't expect. It's crazy hard, and it's really one of the most amazing gifts that Hashem ever gave us. But I can only imagine seeing it as an outsider. It's just all full of potholes and pitfalls. What are the biggest advices you can give to Christians who want to connect with Jews? What are the big pitfalls, the red flags, the absolutely don't do's? What do you see? Did you make any mistakes? I mean, you're the sweetest, most polite guy in the world. I can't imagine.
It took 25 years of interacting with Israeli Jews to create some bad impressions, and I thought I understood more than I did when I actually started interacting more with the Orthodox community. I think it's like, what are the things to watch out for? Well, I already mentioned this idea of arrogance. I think it but there are many Christians who feel something deep in their heart, we might say in their spirit. They feel something that is a draw. They're being drawn to Orthodox Jews. They don't know why. But there's just a drawing there. I think it's natural. What is it? Pascal said, God has created, there is a vacuum in every human soul that can only be filled by God. I've wondered if there isn't a vacuum in every Christian that can only be filled by relationship with God's
and something
people.
Something is certainly going on in Israel now.
So
far as the end of days. So I can see anyone who loves God would want to would be drawn to that.
So there's already this natural attraction. The only thing is, okay, what is it going to be about? And I think what I think the purpose of the 5 years book is to give an alternative window of why. Come and interact with Orthodox Jews because God favors it, and because through that process he will unlock more of the Bible for you than ever before. And actually, the Hebrew Bible, especially the Torah, has just become now like exciting. I love reading the Torah. On Saturdays I read the Torah portion along with with all the Jewish people. That's one of the that process and how that happened is also one of the stories in the book. But
And
I think it's more of the heart. I think so. A lot of Christians have that draw. So it's just a matter of just a little bit of guidance along the way. But 5 years with Orthodox Jews is an example of what God does in that. Everybody's journey is going to be a little bit different. So it's not. This is my invitation to other Christians to come along with me and walk with me. Maybe you can't go to Israel right now, but you can walk with me in this and be inspired for what God can do and wants to do with your own walk as well.
you actually got me in trouble once with my wife. Because
only once.
Only once. You were in my home, you visited, and you excused yourself because you were getting a phone call from your wife, and you prayed with your wife
my wife, yes.
And you prayed with your wife on the phone.
Okay.
And then my wife turned to me and she's like, "Why don't we do that?"
I don't remember that happening. That's amazing. Okay.
Oh, I do. I do. She said, "Well, why don't we do that?" And I'm like, okay. I mean, yeah, there's definitely.
Let me ask you a question. Do you think that there is maybe something in a Jewish heart that would say that there's a draw somehow, for non-Jews that are interested in Jewish life and Torah? Is there a draw, or is it just in the Christian side to the Jewish side?
No. I think it's been covered up by a lot of history. There is a lot of reluctance. A lot of it is justified. I think being in the land of Israel changes that. I'm not intimidated. There's no fear of, I'm not the stranger in a strange land anymore. And Rivka said something really profound. She said, as soon as you start looking for the biblical precedent for Jews connecting with the nations, that's all you find. It's not that, it's all over. Yeah. I mean, when I went back and reread the dedication of the temple by King Solomon, the second thing he said was, and when the strangers come from foreign nations to pray here, accept their prayers. And I'm like, I don't remember that. And then you say, well, we're supposed to be a light unto the nations. Jews who do not want to connect with Christians have to do a lot of linguistic and mental gymnastics to understand that in any other way than open up your doors, bring Bob Odell into your house, sit down, and connect with the dude. There's just this. There is a huge reluctance. But if you open up the door a little bit, one of my first reactions was, wow, this is not what I thought it would be. I was raised amongst Christians. And I think, first of all, coming to Israel and becoming a Torah observant Jew in Israel changed my heart and also my reality. And once I started connecting and I saw the benefits of it, it was just the spiritual benefits. I couldn't stop. And that's where, and I mean, like I said, I'm unconvertible. Yeah. What am I going to do?
Elio, you and I probably had different experiences growing up with Christians, because my experience with Christians growing up in Western Pennsylvania was being called a dirty Jew in the street. So we had a little bit of a different experience depending on where you're coming from.
That might be, but and I get, and there are a lot of different realities out there. I remember one time, it was one of those, silly Eliyahu weird thinking moments when I realized that the Balfour Declaration predated the Holocaust, meaning that the Christian desire to bring Jews back to Zion was not from a place of we feel guilty for the Holocaust. It was from a place of, if we want to fix the world, we need to relate to the Jews and their place in the covenant. And I've spoken to a lot of Christians. sometimes when they tell me, oh, anti-Semitism, no, Christians love Jews, I feel like they're, whitewashing the situation. But sometimes you talk to people from like Texarkana or people from like, you don't know where, and they're like, oh no, my parents were very clear that we have to love Jews and love the Jews.
But again,
And
remember, Elio, that you grew up not Orthodox, and I grew up as an
that's
obviously
true
Orthodox
too.
Jew.
That's true too.
So there's
And
a different
also,
relationship.
I grew up in Philadelphia, New Jersey, New York. However, it's funny that I feel a deep. Now I feel that there is the anti-Semitism that I'm afraid of is not coming from Christians. It's the evangelicals are being a bit of a shield against the left-wing liberalism, which is so. I mean, now racism is the big. If you're not Democrat, then you are racist. I don't want to take this to politics, but Judaism has always been racism light. There's a double standard when it comes to racism. When it comes to anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism is like it's not really racism.
Yes.
And also,
You're using a very broad brush. I know we're running out of time here.
I'm good at
there
that.
are different Christians, there are different churches, and they have different opinions when it comes to Jews and how they relate to Israel.
But I think if we want to change history, we have to change our behavior. And I think that there was a lot of divine intervention that all of a sudden something started happening about 10, 15 years ago. I think more 15 years ago. That was unprecedented. It was counterintuitive. And all of a sudden, this Christian from Texas, high-tech guy, somehow connected to Israel. That doesn't make sense. He suddenly became my friend who visits me in the Golan. That doesn't make sense. But I think that's what's going to stop. That's what's going to change that history.
Yeah. Really, biases and stereotypes are ripe for being knocked right out of the park as soon as people come together in relationship.
And it was always the idea was that the reason why the Christians hate us is because of the Torah. And now we're putting the lie to that, and we're showing that the basis of our future relationship, deepening, intense relationship, is going to come from the Torah.
So I can actually tell you my Masorah, my tradition. My father served in Vietnam in the U.S. Army. I come from a military background. My grandfather served, and he was an Orthodox Jew, and he was with other Jews that were not Orthodox. And he tells me how they were picked on, they were made fun of all the time. They were always called names, but they stayed away from him because he was proud about his faith, and they respected the fact that he was a proud Orthodox Jew versus someone who was Jewish, but in name only.
Mm.
I'd like to make one point, and pivoting from that to the other side of the equation. That you started, Josh, with the book about the woman who found herself in an Orthodox community in was it Philadelphia? You said, or
let's see if I can.
Oh, there it is. Okay, yeah, Strangers and Neighbors, and so I think that book, that experience, there's two aspects of that I think should be touched on. One, this book, 5 Years with Orthodox Jews, I don't think it's new in the sense of like, is this the first time that this has happened? Certainly, I am not the first Christian who's found relationship with Orthodox Jews in Israel, and it can also happen outside of Israel. As your book, as the book we're holding up, Josh, amply demonstrates. But I'd like to say two things. First, regarding it happening outside of Israel, yeah, and people will say, "Can I do this? Can I interact?" Yes, you can, and it can be very meaningful. I have a feeling, though, that interacting with the Orthodox Jews of Israel takes that relationship to a whole new level, because of the land and the prophecies being fulfilled in the land of Israel. So that's one reason why I wanted to put out a book about this happening in Israel. Secondly, I suspect that over the last 2,000 years, there were people like me all through history who found themselves drawn to their Orthodox Jews, and quietly, carefully made some relationships, began to learn and study. There is some historical thread of this, even in the Christian world, but they couldn't really do it openly because of the overall, the prevailing attitude of Christianity towards the Jews. But once again, Israel, starting in 1948, the reestablishment of Israel, and Jerusalem being unified in 67, and 50 years later, somebody comes and is writing a book. Now it can be open. This can be fully open now. That's what I think is sort of the news here. Not that it's new, but that we can talk about it. And so that's what this book is about. And it's a big topic. That's why it's a big book, really. There's 40 different stories in here, and 40 different chapters. It's a big book. It's a big topic. So thanks. I wanted to add that other perspective.
So I mean, on so many levels, I hate to say that, gosh, we've gone way over time here, but that was kind of anticipated. Bob, you're amazing on so many levels, and
I just want to add something before you conclude, if I may.
Sure.
I was sent to Houston during a couple of years ago during the big flood that hurricane that happened, and I was sent by with a delegation to help out over there. And I was amazed to see that some of the churches there had more Israeli flags flying than the synagogues did. And,
boy.
So that was an eye opener for me. So I see the Israeli flag above your head. My only prayer is, my hope is that all the Jews that in America, they're also flying that flag proudly over their heads as well.
I hate to say it. It was one of the more painful realizations for me, was that I get so much more and feel so close and feel so open with Bob and with Christians like him than I do with Jews in America who have turned their back on Israel. That's hugely painful for me.
And
yeah.
To Josh's point, the flag above me was given to me by a Hispanic pastor in the city of Austin. He gave, this was his most precious gift to give to other Christian leaders. He'd say, here's your flag. Well, I got to put it up, right? So it's right. And there's Israeli flag, and there's flags of many nations in their church. But anyway, you're right. I think there's some, it goes beyond nationalism. This is about
right.
This
exactly.
is about something more fundamental. This is about God's story on this earth. That's what this flag is about. And that we all want to be part of something bigger than ourselves.
From your mouth to all the Orthodox Jewish ears.
So before we say goodbye, I'm going to, how do you say mechayev? I'm going to require from you,
obligate,
that you come at a future date. You started an initiative, which is the 9th of Av for non-Jews. You're very modest about it. And there are those of us who feel that your initiative, which is not Christians doing a Jewish 9th of Av, it is Christians doing a Christian 9th of Av, which is entirely different.
Yeah. And
there are those of us who, through a interesting Torah learning process, have come to the conclusion that initiative will be the catalyst that brings about the prophecy of the 9th of Av being turned from a day of mourning to a day of joy. And I think you're onto something with that. So I'm sorry.
And it was a team effort, and I am so it really started with a friend who had done a similar historical study and came to me and said, I think there's more work that needs to be done with respect to this 9th of Av that you talk about in one of your earlier books. So
It's
thank
huge.
you for saying that. You know, that is bigger than all of us here. Nobody. Somebody said, if you don't really know somebody until you know where they hurt. And I think that's the opportunity with the nation's 9th of Av, to step into something, to understand and experience in our own way how the Jewish people are mourning that day and looking forward to the coming redemption. And it's a great opportunity. I think it's another common ground opportunity. Thanks for mentioning that. And we talk about it more in the book.
Absolutely. So we were out of time a while back, but Bob, don't you go away. We have to stop the program. I'd like to thank you all for joining us. There's something huge going on, and we're hoping you'll be with us on that.
And you're on the forefront of it. And we tell people in the book to Israel365 is one of the best ways to connect with the land of Israel.
Even if we're being censored by big tech.
Even after being censored.
Yeah.
So thank you all for joining us. Be very blessed. If you bless us, we have no choice but to bless you back, because that's the way it's written. So thanks for joining us. Bless us. We'll bless you right back, guaranteed. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.